Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We are happy to have you here at the Project Lead Advanced Topic session that is part of the Alamo Advocate Program. It's an honor to be alongside such dedicated advocates and experts. This session, as you all, I think, or many of you know, is part of NBCC's commitment to empower advocates with the knowledge and the tools that they need to make a meaningful impact in NBCC's mission to end breast cancer. So I hope that you all enjoyed the lunch and are ready for an impactful session. So before we begin, let's take a moment to honor the lives impacted by breast cancer. I think many of you who know NBCC know that we start all of our programming events by honoring and remembering advocates who are no longer with us to remind us of why we are here and what we do. So I would first like to bring Beth Emery up to the stage. She is going to be honoring an advocate for whom this program, this entire Alamo program, is dedicated to.
Thank you, Michelle. Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation is dedicating the entire Alamo Advocate Program this year to Laura Wells Bowers, who was a board member and for the last couple of years did all of our development work on this program. She lived a life of challenges, but also one of hope, courage, love, and joy. Laura was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014, but she did not let this slow her down. She completed her dissertation, did her defense for her PhD in nutritional science while undergoing chemotherapy. She did postdoctoral work at the University of North Carolina and then became an assistant professor in nutrition at Purdue University. She retired from academia in 2021 and moved back to San Antonio to be closer to her family. Laura was an avid runner. She participated in races like the Rock and Roll San Antonio Half Marathon and Live Strong Austin. She qualified for the 2014 Boston Marathon, but her cancer diagnosis prevented her from participating. Laura was a truly dedicated breast cancer advocate. Although diagnosed with brain metastasis, she continued to serve on the board of directors of ABCF and the Alamo Advocate Program team. In these roles, she worked to promote funding of breast cancer research, educate patients and the public about the disease, and advocate for legislation to ensure that all breast cancer patients have access to quality care. She was a 2023 graduate of NBCC's Project Lead. Laura passed away on May 20th, 2024. Please join me in a moment of silence for Laura Wells Bowers.
All right, thank you. And so I would also like now to have Christine Carpenter come to the stage to read a moment of silence for another advocate leader that we lost this year.
Ann Fonfa was on the NBCC's C4 board for many years. She was a part of NBCC since almost the beginning. Ann was memorable, relentless, and real. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in January 1993, but due to severe multiple chemical sensitivity, had to refuse chemotherapy, radiation, and hormonal treatments. She had many surgeries and chose a holistic approach to cancer. She created the nonprofit Annie Appleseed Project to show the evidence base behind the many natural therapies she used. She was a fearless and fierce patient advocate. Ann attended several hundred scientific, medical, research, and advocacy meetings. She raised questions about the environment, drug approvals, LGBTQIA issues, research methodologies, axillary node dissection, and much, much more. She served on many panels and was NBCC's Florida field coordinator and a member of NBCC's board of directors. Ann attended many NBCC conferences, summits, and lobby days over the years and was a Project Lead graduate. Ann was the consumer advocate on the Adverse Effects Methods group of the Cochrane Collaboration and a member of CUE, Consumers United for Evidence-Based Healthcare. She served as a reviewer for the Department of Defense, Avon Foundation, California Breast Cancer Research Program, and healthratings.org, and contributed her time and energy as co-chair of West Palm Beach National Organization for Women and worked with LGBTQIA for Equality Now. Anne passed away on January 29th, 2024. Please join me in a moment of silence to remember Anne. Thank you.
All right, thank you to both Beth and Christine for that. All right. So I wanted to just, take a second here to thank all of the sponsors. You saw this list of sponsors. This is the list of sponsors for the Alamo Advocate Program. That is what allows Alamo to host this program and bring so many advocates here on scholarship. So I want to thank them for that. And I'd like to also acknowledge the sponsors for this NBCC program. These are the sponsors for NBCC's Project Lead, and without their support, we couldn't offer Project Lead, the continuing education that we offer, as well as these advanced topic sessions that we present. All right, so before I introduce our moderator for today's event, I wanted to just highlight a couple of events that are coming up in 2025. First is the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Advocate Leadership Summit, which is going to take place in May, early May, first weekend. And it's a great opportunity to reunite with advocates from all over the country and also some of our international advocates. And then we culminate that with our lobby day on May 6th, and that is a very impactful event, and we're out there lobbying for public policies that support access to care and funding for research, and we hope that you can be part of that. The other thing I wanted to note, this as I would imagine that probably half of you in this room are Project Lead grads. Who's a Project Lead grad? Raise your hand. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, for those of you who are not Project Lead grads and are interested, we currently have applications open and are taking applications for the 2025 session. It's a wonderful 6-day program for you to learn the science and biology of breast cancer and also advocacy skills. So if you're interested, please visit our website and submit an application. We're taking those. Applications are open until, well, I guess that's hidden, but I think it's in April. So we hope that you'll join us. So at this point now, what I'd like to do is introduce our moderator for the entire program. Michelle Rakoff is a patient and research advocate and a breast cancer survivor of more than 30 years. She is the executive director of the Breast Cancer Care and Research Fund and serves on the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Board of Directors. Michelle has been a vital part of advancing breast cancer advocacy, research collaborations, and peer reviews for organizations like the Department of Defense. Michelle has collaborated with numerous researchers and with institutions like UCLA and the City of Hope. She has served on the Data Safety Monitoring Board, boards for a number of groups, and is an advocate mentor at the Project Lead Institute. And she is also an advocate member of NBCC's Artemis Project. So please welcome Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that warm and generous introduction. Today, we're going to start out with our session with TRIO, and I think that TRIO US, and I think you really want to learn a lot about this because it can involve you. Our first session explores how TRIO US is fostering collaboration between advocates, researchers, and patients. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aditya Bardia and Dr. Meghan Brennan. Dr. Bardia is a professor in the Department of Medicine, Division of Hematology Oncology at UCLA, and the Director of Translational Research Integration at TRIO US. He is internationally recognized for his pioneering work in cancer therapeutics, including antibody-drug conjugates and endocrine therapy for breast cancer. His clinical and translational research has led to multiple FDA-approved treatments, and he is a mentor for academic trainees and junior faculty. Joining him will be also Dr. Meghan Brennan. Dr. Brennan is a PhD RN-ONP, serving as the Chief Operating Officer at TRIO US, a site management organization with oncology practices across the United States. With over 25 years of experience in clinical research and oncology nursing, she has been instrumental in advancing patient-centric research approaches. Dr. Brennan previously oversaw clinical research at UCLA and City of Hope, focusing on making clinical trials more inclusive and accessible. Please welcome them to the stage. You're first.
Ooh, that's bright. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all of you, NBCC, as well as the Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation, for letting us come here today. Some of you may know about us, and for those of you that do, it'll be a little redundant, and for those of you that don't, I hope that this will provide some insight into what our mission is and sort of what my soapbox is about patient centricity, and then Dr. Bardia will speak about some of the trials that we're offering in the network. And I will be as brief as possible. If there's anything that I go through too quickly, these slides will be available. So many of you may know who Dr. Dennis Lehman is, but he is the co-founder of TRIO US, which is a site management organization, and I'll explain that a little bit. And he co-founded that with Dr. John Glaspie out of UCLA. I run the organization on a day-to-day basis, and Dr. Bardia provides oversight as the Chief Medical Officer. We also have a Chief Physician Relations Officer who's with us today, Dr. Becky Maroos, who's been a participating investigator since its inception, and you'll see how many years that is later. And then we have a strong team. Also with us today are Brenda Williams and Allison Muff. Brenda oversees all the day-to-day efforts at the site level, and Allison is the sort of the linchpin of everything, and she brings these events together and creates sort of an opportunity for us to be able to talk to you all. This very busy slide is just a quick history of TRIO US, and you can see that we have been around for some time. We started back in the early 90s as an offshoot of UCLA, and that was at the time when we were starting to do some of the early Herceptin work. And so Dr. Sleeman and Glaspie really needed an opportunity to get out to the patients and make their lives easier than rather having them come into a tertiary quaternary breast cancer center, treatment center, where they'd rather stay close to their homes with their community physicians. That's really how we started. Over time, things have evolved. We separated from UCLA only from a sort of a legal logistical standpoint. They really weren't comfortable with someone like Dr. Sleeman being a PI and overseeing faculty that weren't UCLA faculty. So we officially separated, but we have an extremely tight formal affiliation with UCLA. We always have, and we continue to do that. We've evolved over the years, and we developed a partnership with TRIO Global, who I'll talk about very briefly, as well as Dr. Sleeman's and Dr. Press's research labs. So over time, we have really developed a strong partnership with those two entities so that we can bring out trials to the community. The partnership between TRIO started when TRIO in '97 was the Breast Cancer International Research Group. Some of you may remember that, BCIRG, and then they expanded into other indications, became CIRG, and in 2011, we thought it would clarify our partnership if we all have the same similar name, so we became TRIO US, and they became TRIO Global, and honestly, I think it's just confused people, but Trio Global is normally the entity that you will hear about as just Trio. So we also offer some CRO services at Trio US, but most recently, what we've been focusing on, Brenda and myself and Dr. Slayman, is how to establish a more patient-centric research model within the community. This is just a quick schematic to show you that Trio is a triad, and it represents the translational labs, which bring early phase research out into our Trio US sites, then Trio US, as well as the large international group. So as Michelle said, we have a large organization. It's 12 sites, independent medical oncology programs or practices or institutions across 7 states. And so they work with us to bring out cutting-edge research to their communities. The blue represents where we have locations. The orange represents, sorry, I just realized how short I am. The orange represents where we have sites that we are working with to develop a relationship so that we can make them a Trio US site. And then the site in Tennessee, actually, we're excited about that. We're piloting a program with them, and that will cover Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of Arkansas, in addition to our Jonesboro site. So a real opportunity there. This is just a quick blowout of the Southern California sites and our Arizona sites. So we started, obviously, in Southern California, associated with Los Angeles and UCLA. Over time, UCLA has developed a large community program themselves. They have 9 practices that are 19 UCLA-owned and operated practices. These 5 represented here are not UCLA. They are part of Trio US Network. They're independent of UCLA. And then the Arizona sites, we're excited. This is a new partnership as well. They cover pretty much the entire Scottsdale, Phoenix, Mesa area. So basically what an SMO is, and I'm sorry if I'm redundant, is we are an opportunity for sites that wouldn't otherwise have the ability to do research. We give them that ability. So we take away some of the administrative burden, the contracting, the billing, all the stuff that takes a long time on an administrative level. We centralize that, and we do that for our sites. And then what we ask of our sites in the decentralized aspect is to identify the patients, work with the patients, put the patients on trial, make sure they're taking care of the patients according to the protocol, and that they have the source documentation in order to support the data. So that's really, the focus is we'll do all the administrative stuff, and then you just focus on patients. Since our inception, we have enrolled over 6,500 patients on different clinical trials. Our mainstay, our flagship, was breast, as I said, and these are just some of the successes that we've been in partnership with UCLA and sponsors. I highlighted the breast ones so that just to highlight where we are and all the other diseases that we're actually working on as well. Trio Global is our partner, and many of you know of Trio Global. They are most recently, they're the CRO that worked with Novartis on the NATALEE trial. We just saw that data and approval last month. And so they have a large network of sites across 24 countries, and they work with those different countries and those different physicians in order to bring large registrational, high-quality trials out to them. And so the way that it works is that Trio has a scientific advisory board with support, and these are people from all over the world, and they participate on this, and they bring in ideas. They actually look at studies that come to us to make sure that they think that there's scientific merit. We don't just take any study, just like NBCC is very discerning in studies that they support. That's how we approach it from a very scientific perspective. And then there's operational oversight. And then we work with our leaders in the community to help improve engagement and support the sites at any level that we can. This is a story that I think many of you already know, but this is how the relationship between Trio US, UCLA's labs, and the large entity Trio, why it's such a success and why we continue this relationship. As many of you know, the drug palbociclib, which is a CDK4/6 inhibitor, was a drug that was sitting on the shelf in the late 90s. Dr. Slayman was interested in looking at this across his cell panel. He was pretty desperate to find something for triple-negative breast cancer, but he did a blind review through the 600 cell line for all diseases in 2007, and they identified that this has an opportunity in hormone-positive breast cancer. And so in 2009 is when we started the first early phase trial, and cut to 2013, we have breakthrough status, and then by 2017, we have a drug approved. As many of you know, that is a pretty swift timeline in comparison to what we see elsewhere. And I didn't carry this out, I should have, my apologies, to 2024. But as you know, there's 3 CDK4/6s out there, palbociclib, ribociclib, and abemaciclib. We have worked with all of them, but this platform is really, by design, something that came out of a collaboration that didn't exist prior to that. So we're very excited about that. This type of work continues with UCLA and the labs and TRIO. And that, of course, is a very important initiative. But over time, I recognized, I think everyone recognizes the challenges of being on a clinical trial and getting patients on clinical trials. So while all this is going on in the background, my focus has really been most recently to try and figure out how to make it a little bit easier in any way we can for our patients and their caregivers, their families, to support them and to make sure that we are meeting the needs of those patients. And so do we have a robust portfolio? What are the choices that we have available? Making sure that we're compliant and safe and that we are demonstrating the respect for the patient and the family and the caregiver. So to that end, I have been working on figuring out ways that we can ensure that all patients are getting access to clinical trials and have their needs met. TRIO-US brought the studies out to the community, and we love our community programs, but we still have a long way to go. And I know how instrumental NBCC has been in making sure that patients in need get the care that they need, they get the drugs that they need. But I've watched over time also that we haven't gotten very far in some efforts related to having a diverse population of patients. And I have to fight, there's not one sponsor out there that hasn't fought with me about what the difference is between equality and equity. And that's been a huge struggle when we go to centers that are run by the county in Los Angeles, for example, that don't have all the same drugs as private practice. So we need to get the drugs that are standard of care for a clinical trial, like the NATALEE trial. They did not have the standard of care drugs on formulary. So we needed those to be provided. And so getting the industry partners to recognize that providing those drugs to patients that wouldn't otherwise have access to them is not something that should be considered inducement or a problem. It should be considered the opportunity for these patients to actually get access to studies. Saying that you have a study is great, but if you don't have the therapies to support it or they don't have what they need to be on it, as you all know, it just doesn't work. So I've been working in the background with all of our different industry partners when we have trials that are going out to these communities to make sure that they have what they need. But there continues to be needs for patients that have that don't have social services, compensation for patients and caregivers. We really have a long way to go, and that's really what I have been focused on this last year, is developing a more patient-centric research model where we reduce the burden on the patient and we help to improve the patient experience. So where is the patient at? What do they need? Can we bring any of the services into the home? We have several early phase trials now that sponsors have agreed to let some of the procedures, blood draws, EKGs, be actually done in the home so patients and their caregivers don't have to drive into clinic every other day in order to be on an early phase trial. And so there's a lot of opportunity there related to home health services, but also social services. Do they need adult care? Do they need elder care, child care? What's going to happen when they have their surgery and then they're going to, after their neoadjuvant study, and what's going to happen to their pets? And so it seems like some of these things I think, a lot of times seem like they're small, but they're not. They're really big. And I know that all of you know how large that these challenges are. So what are the things that we can do to improve that patient experience? And that's really what I've been focused on. And part of the reason I wanted to talk to you all today is You saw where we are in this country. There's so many other locations, there's so many other organizations and institutions that could benefit from having the research accessible to their patients. And so when we do that, how do we partner with a site? And then what can we do to reduce the burden on the site, but more importantly, the burden on the patient? And so that's really where we're focusing our efforts these days. But to all of you out there in your different, with your different constituents, if there's a site that you think, wow, they could really benefit from being able to offer research to their patients, that may be an opportunity for us to provide some assistance. Or if there's a site that you know that does good research, but they don't have a lot of early phase cutting edge research, that may be another opportunity. So whatever you think is an opportunity, most likely it is. And so that's really why I wanted to talk to you about what we're bringing to the community. Dr. Bardia is going to talk to you a little bit about the studies, the exciting studies that we have in the network that are going out to these sites. Certainly, if there's anything that is of interest, please, Michelle has my information. She can give it to you. We also, as a plug, we have brochures that we made with Novartis. They are generic, but this is why be on a clinical trial. Sorry, that's backwards. Just doesn't matter what your disease is, doesn't matter why be on a clinical trial, why diversity, inclusion is so important. And we did it in English and in Spanish, and so there's some available. We'll send you PDFs. We've sent them to every physician office we can think of just to let patients know their participation is essential and matters. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bardia. I went over, sorry.
It's okay. Very good.
Thanks so much, Dr. Brennan. So I will continue, and I will review some stories in terms of how TRIO US is an organization that's focused on empowering advocates, researchers, and patients together. It's teamwork. As they say, it takes a village. I'll first start with the culture. So the culture at TRIO US, and this was essentially dictated by Dr. Slayman, has been the culture of innovation and thinking outside the box. And I'll share a couple of examples that clearly highlight how the team has been focused on thinking of solutions that otherwise would have been ignored. And it's not a surprise that Dr. Slayman received the Lasker Clinical Medical Research Award. 1 in 3 people who win the Lasker Award also are awarded the Nobel Prize. So it just speaks to the tremendous and pioneering work that has been done by the team. And this was based on trastuzumab. And for the trastuzumab story, it's important to remember TRIO US, but also the funding that was provided by different organizations. NBCC was involved, DoD was involved. And if we look at the story of trastuzumab, you see there were 4 major themes. One was innovation with a patient focus. Trastuzumab could have been developed for all breast cancers, but from the start, it was clear that we've identified a target, which is HER2, which is a subset of breast cancers, and we will develop a drug for that subset. If trastuzumab had been developed like some of the other studies, say in all breast cancer, it's possible that either the signal would have been diluted or it would have been a negative study. But from the start, it was clear we'll understand tumor biology and we'll develop a drug that's biomarker-based. There were a number of challenges. There have been movies about the challenges associated with the development of trastuzumab, but it was always about biomarker-driven, patient-centered research that's team-based, and that would have a global impact. The focus is with the patient at the center and bringing in different disciplines that are required to ensure that a patient receives compassionate care and the integrated team comes to the patient. As Meghan mentioned previously, the idea with TRIO US was to bring trials to patients rather than the other way around. And that's why you have sites all over US. So let me share 3 examples of this point about culture of innovation and patient-centered approach. I'll start with CDK4/6 inhibitor. and I'll talk about antibody-drug conjugates, and then finally, liquid biopsies, something that are very exciting in terms of how they could potentially be applied for therapies and to prevent recurrence. So February of 2015, at that time I was in Boston. And there was a landmark event in Boston. On the left-hand side, you see white, that's all snow. So there were two major unprecedented events in Boston in February 2015. The first one was the snowstorm. More than 37 inches in one day, something that the city had never seen since weather records began. The other transformative or unprecedented event was the approval of palbociclib in February of 2015. And that was based on a randomized phase 2 trial. In breast cancer before, we were used to large phase 3 clinical trial, thousands of patients. But for the first time, we had a drug that was approved based on a phase 2, not a phase 3 trial. And the reason was the results were very compelling. So this was presented at SABCS about 10 years ago in December of 2012. And I remember sitting in the audience and just looking at the Kaplan-Meier curves. So as a reminder, these are Kaplan-Meier curves. This is for progression-free survival. So when we look at 1, so that's the top, that's where everyone is alive and does not have disease progression. And then you follow patients over time. If there's disease progression, then you have drop in the curve. And with subsequent disease progression, you have drops in the curve. And every line represents a patient. So you can clearly see there's a separation between the curves. In blue is patients who receive palbociclib, and in yellow are patients who receive standard endocrine therapy. And there was close to 4 times improvement in progression-free survival. Patients who were receiving standard of care endocrine therapy had an average or median progression-free survival of 7.5 months, while those who received palbociclib plus endocrine therapy had 26 months of median progression-free survival. The results were so compelling that the FDA felt that it needs to approve the drug based on a phase 2 trial. Now, this was in metastatic breast cancer, and as Meghan mentioned, after palbociclib, we've had other drugs approved, ribociclib and abemaciclib. How about early breast cancer? Now the goal is to prevent metastatic disease. Can we introduce therapies in the adjuvant setting so we can actually prevent metastatic disease? This was published this year. I want to highlight this article again to emphasize the point about involvement of patients and patient advocates. In this article, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the best journal we have, and it's a very prestigious journal. In this publication, Fran Visco, who was a patient advocate who was involved with this clinical trial, was included as well. It just speaks to the importance of patient advocates, why the team felt that it was important to include patient advocates in this seminal publication, because she was key in terms of design of this study, in terms of guiding this trial. In this trial, there were a couple of unique features that were not present in the other adjuvant trials. The first one was the dose of ribociclib. It was felt that in the metastatic setting, we use 600 milligrams, but that might be just too much. In the adjuvant setting, patients might have more adverse events, patients might have more discontinuations. So in this trial, in the adjuvant setting, a dose of 400 milligrams was used, which is very different from the other adjuvant studies. You'll see in general, the dose in the metastatic setting and dose in the adjuvant setting is the same. But it was different in this trial because it was felt that we don't need the higher dose. Can we use a dose that'll still have benefit but lower the toxicity? And the second point was inclusion of stage 2 as well. It was felt that a subproportion of patients with stage 2 breast cancer do have risk of recurrence. And from a biology perspective, CDK4/6 inhibitors would work in that setting. So that's why this was a broader trial that included both patients with stage 2 and stage 3 disease. So the drug is now approved. It was approved in the US in September of this year, and it was approved by EMA last month. So this is a nice example how discovery in total led to the clinical trial. And as Meghan mentioned, this was a signal that was ignored by other labs, was ignored by other sponsors because they were trying to develop CDK4/6 inhibitors for triple-negative breast cancer. But because of the unbiased approach in the lab, where it was seen that the benefit of CDK4/6 inhibitor would likely be in ER-positive disease, it was developed in ER-positive breast cancer in combination with endocrine therapy. And we can talk about the rationale later on in terms of why it works more in ER-positive disease and does not work much in triple-negative breast cancer. But it speaks to the point that you have to go by data, looking at the results in the lab, and then based on evidence, preclinical evidence, the clinical trial was designed, which led to the first approval of palbociclib and now 3 other drugs, and now approved in the adjuvant setting as well. And again, highlights the idea of the innovation, the patient focus, how the team had to overcome challenges, used a team approach, and now has a global impact. The second example I want to highlight is how newer therapies are replacing chemotherapy. You know, as medical oncologists, we often prescribe chemotherapy, but we're very concerned about the side effects that chemotherapy can bring in. And that could be neuropathy, that could be nausea, that could be hair loss, there could be long-term consequences of chemotherapy in terms of impact on the heart and small but known risk of leukemia as well. So the question is, can we replace chemotherapy by newer therapies that are more effective and less toxic? And that's where antibody-drug conjugates come in. So let me share an example of a patient I had seen a few years ago. This was when I was in Boston. A 39-year-old female had undergone left mastectomy for triple-negative breast cancer, received chemotherapy after that, which would be standard at that time. But unfortunately, a year after completion of chemotherapy, had these terrible chest wall nodules, as you can see in the picture. She had a biopsy which confirmed that the tumor was triple-negative, received a number of chemotherapies, and then came to see me for discussion of treatment options. I'll never forget the visit. She was a cheerful lady, and her first question was, why are you calling this triple-negative breast cancer? I don't like the term negative. Just to start with, you're saying something negative. So, and she also asked the point, which was, can we find something positive in the negative? And I think she was asking a simple question, but a very deep one. From a biology perspective, we know triple-negative breast cancer divides. So there has to be something positive in terms of something that's driving this cancer. How can something that's completely negative grow? There has to be something positive, something that's driving the cancer that we can target with therapies. And that's where, again, ADCs come in. I like to give this example of the Trojan horse story. How many of you have heard of the Trojan horse story? So this is an example because, you know, for years, the Greeks were trying to take the city of Troy. And so eventually they constructed this wooden horse, they hid men inside, the Trojans pulled the horse inside the city, the men came out, and they were able to defeat and take the city of Troy. You can draw the analogy with cancer. You know, what if with these Trojan horse therapies, we can control cancer? You know, we talk about the war against cancer. What if we can win the war against cancer with therapies like these, which are much more effective and much less toxic? So this is the principle behind antibody-drug conjugates. The idea is you have an antibody with chemotherapy or payload attached to it. The antibody-drug conjugate, like the Trojan horse, would get inside the cancer cell and then release the payload or the army inside the cancer cell, which would then result in apoptosis. And these newer ADCs also have a bystander effect. What if that cancer cell does not have the antigen that the antibody is trying to target. We know that tumors are complex. There could be heterogeneity in terms of expression of the antigen. So it's because of this bystander effect, it can even impact cells that do not express the antigen. And an example of this is sacituzumab govitecan that we were involved with. Sacituzumab govitecan is an antibody drug conjugate. Essentially, it targets TROP2. Now, when the drug was being developed, we had a choice as investigators to develop the drug in breast cancer, in ER-positive breast cancer, in triple-negative breast cancer, and other cancers as well, because TROP2 is expressed in multiple cancers. It was first developed in triple-negative breast cancer. And the reason is not based on biology. The reason is based on unmet need. We knew as investigators and in discussing with patients that triple-negative breast cancer is a major unmet need. And so we wanted to develop a drug that would address the unmet need. And so the first trial with sacituzumab govitecan was in triple-negative breast cancer, where it was compared head-to-head against chemotherapy. These are the Kaplan-Meier curves, progression-free survival, overall survival. Again, you see clear separation in favor of sacituzumab govitecan, close to doubling of overall survival. A couple of years ago, I had a discussion with an executive from a major pharma company. And he was asking the question, we have drugs. I'm still surprised as to why you developed the drug first in triple-negative breast cancer. If we look at proportion of breast cancer, if we look at market, it's much higher in ER-positive disease. And I said the answer is because it was a company that agreed that we should develop the drug first in a setting where there's unmet patient need. And this was in discussion with patients. This was with patient advocate who was involved in this clinical trial. And based on a single-arm phase 2 study during the COVID pandemic in May of 2021, April of 2020, FDA approved sacituzumab govitecan for patients with metastatic TNBC. And over the past 4 years now, we've had a major growth in antibody drug conjugates. Besides sacituzumab govitecan, there's trastuzumab deruxtecan. You'll hear about that in this conference. A number of other ADCs being developed as well. Now, by no means they are perfect. They do have toxicities, but it is a start in terms of trying to replace chemotherapy with therapies that are more efficacious and less toxic. And these therapies are also being moved to early breast cancer. Now, building on this theme, we also want to replace chemotherapy completely. And an example of this is in HER2-positive breast cancer. We've seen that trastuzumab was a major success story, but trastuzumab is given in combination with chemo. So can we replace chemotherapy with more effective drugs, including CDK4/6 inhibitors? In the work that was done in TORAL, it was identified that CDK4/6 inhibitors work both in ER-positive disease and also in HER2-positive breast cancer, at least in cell lines. So the team has now done work looking at a triple combination of 2 anti-HER2 therapies in combination with a CDK4/6 inhibitor. And in the preclinical models, you could see that it was as good as, if not better, than trastuzumab in combination with chemotherapy. And that's led to a clinical trial, first in the metastatic setting, where these drugs are being combined. The metastatic trial portion is now complete, and the goal is to move this triple therapy that is not chemotherapy-based, it's a chemotherapy-free regimen for patients with early HER2-positive breast cancer. This work is being done by Dr. Nick McAndrew. And third final example I want to highlight is the role of liquid biopsies. You'll hear at SABCS, there's a dedicated session on circulating tumor DNA. The idea is that when a tumor grows, it sheds its DNA in the blood. And before a patient has metastatic disease that you can see on scans, you can detect these tumor DNA in the blood. So similar to other subtypes of cancers, in breast cancer, you can detect tumor DNA in the blood with very sensitive technologies, often before a patient has metastatic disease. Two quick examples, work led by Dr. Marla Lipsik-Sharf, who's a medical oncologist at UCLA. Some oncologists have started ordering these circulating tumor DNA tests, an example being Signatera. There are others as well in the clinic. And so this is a patient who had circulating tumor DNA tested 2 months after surgery. About 6 months later, you could see tumor DNA that was detected in the blood. Patient had scans, and there was no evidence of disease on scans. The patient was on anastrozole. The physician felt that because this patient is on anastrozole and there's still detectable tumor DNA, if I continue on the same path, this patient will have florid metastatic disease that we can see on the scan. So can we intervene early enough to prevent metastatic disease? So the physician added abemaciclib, and you could see that the tumor DNA was gone. It came up again a bit, but then eventually completely disappeared. There's another patient with HER2-positive disease. Similar story, patient had surgery, and then after surgery had tumor DNA that was detectable. This patient actually had a local recurrence. On scans, there was no evidence of disease, but on physical examination, the physician was able to note enlarged lymph nodes. The patient had surgery, the lymph nodes were removed, and the tumor DNA again came back to normal, was undetectable, and the patient is doing well. Now, these are just anecdotes. This is not ready for prime time yet, but building on this, we will be doing a study through TRIO called the MARY study. It's for patients who have detectable tumor DNA. So patients who have surgery, after surgery, they are on hormonal therapy, tumor DNA is monitored. If you do see detectable tumor DNA, then there would be a therapy that would be introduced with the goal of eradicating that tumor DNA and hopefully preventing metastatic disease. So it's one of the first therapeutic intervention studies based on tumor DNA in the adjuvant setting, and we hope to have this in the TRIO network. So as you can see, there's been this partnership between TRIO and NBCC, as well as patient advocates, with the goal of creating a compassionate environment where the team comes to the patient. There's expertise in clinical research, scientific expertise, regulatory expertise, but importantly, besides this, things that are focused on patient-centered care. Meghan gave the example of home health. I reviewed how patient advocates were involved in design of pivotal studies, including NATALY and the various diversity initiatives. So the goal is to bring this cutting-edge research, clinical trials, translational care into routine care and improve outcomes for patients regardless of their social background, regardless of their racial background. Thanks so much for your attention.
We do have a little time for a question or two. That was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today and explaining to us about TRIO US and about the work, some of the work that you're doing. Does anyone have a question? Well, if nobody has a question, I'm going to ask a quick one. And since we are, oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Could you say who you are?
My name is Debbie Denardi. I'm a patient advocate. I'm a breast cancer survivor.
Okay, thank you.
The first question is, when you mentioned you showed the board of TRIO, do they include patient advocates also, or they're only researchers?
So sorry, I took for granted. Fran Visco is a board of director for both TRIO and the large entity, as well as we have 3 board members for the smaller entity, which is Fran, Dr. Slayman, and Dr. Glaspie. So Fran has always been an integral part of the relationship with us and the community, and a lot of she sees every trial that comes through. So, and she's been instrumental in introducing us to more advocates. That's how I met Michelle.
That's great. Thank you so much. And another question, when you mentioned that there's 65% 6,500 patients enrolled in clinical trials. Do you have the ethnicity? Do we know if they're Latinos, if they're Black, because it would be really important for us to know if everybody is included.
Yes, so we do have that breakdown because that's something that we partner with UCLA so they can report that to the government because they're an NCI designated cancer center. I can tell you that having done this for the data for a number of years, we are falling short by quite a bit when it comes to inclusion. Our Latinx population is, I would say, probably about half the percentage of what we're looking at in the catchment area of Los Angeles. And that's what we sort of compare it to just because of where UCLA is located. And you know it's a majority minority, so we should have a large number of patients from a diverse background. We have, similarly with the African American population, we do not do well there either. I feel like there has to be an opportunity for us to work with our partners in the community, but we fall short. I don't think anyone, there's no way to sugarcoat it. I would love for it to be better. I can also say that some of the hospitals that we've worked with, as I said, these are facilities that don't have the drugs they need to be able to do the study. So now we have to work with our partners and figure out how to make sure that they have those so that the women and the men in those communities can be on a clinical trial. And that, I think, is one of the efforts that I've been really trying to focus on.
So unfortunately, we are running out of time. But I do want to say that if you are an advocate and you do not have to live in California near UCLA, contact Michelle Tregear at NBCC, and she can help you get involved with TRIO US, because I know that their focus really is involving advocates, because as you know, we bring a lot to the table. I want to thank you very much. Did you have a question?
No, I did want to just say we didn't have the time that we would have liked to explore how advocates can get involved with TRIO. And what I'd like to suggest is that perhaps we do a webinar at some point after San Antonio, after the holidays, but where we can explore how can we help, how can advocates help with that problem? Because I know everybody in this room would like to see that diversity in clinical trials and also the decentralization, bringing trials to their communities. So maybe that's an opportunity for us to explore after this.
Yeah, we would love to be able to do that.
Thank you, Michelle, for saying that and thinking about doing that in the future, because we don't want anyone to leave and say, okay, that's over, but it doesn't include me. So we were supposed to take a break. We're going to go into our next presentation. If you need to go out, just come back quickly, and we're going to have our next panel. But thank you so much for all the work you do every single day and really having a focus on the importance of advocates.